Welcome to the Aaron Harber Show. This is part 2 of our special 2-part series with Michael Kimmel. Again, Michael, great having you.
Nice to be with you.
My pleasure. All right, so we've been talking a lot about boys and the evolution of relationships. And where we left off in the first show, you had talked about really how things progress where boys and young men often have relationships with members of the opposite sex, and then once they hit their early mid-teens, a lot of those disappear. Do you feel that that's now changing, that phenomenon is about to change or not?
Yeah, I do think that cross-sex friendships, I think, is a real change among young people, and I think it's undervalued or understudied. And frankly, I think the answer to that, I don't know if I think the reason that boys and girls are able to have the kinds of friendships that they're developing is, in one word, feminism. And the reason that I say that is because girls got way more interesting once they started being interested in science, once they started being interested in sports, once they started playing sports, once they started to decide that they wanted to be doctors and lawyers and whatever else, and work behind TV cameras, and so girls got more interesting. I think feminism has been a great thing for men, precisely because it in the 1950s and 60s, wives were advised to greet their husbands at the door wearing a see-through negligee with a martini, just to be a little bit more interesting. Now they're already interesting. So I think this is great for us.
Do you think that change, there's still, on the part of men, a fear, that some men look at it as a zero-sum game?
Absolutely.
So how is that changing, or how is that going to change?
Well, that's really, I think, that's really the key issue in terms of where we are right now. Because we were talking earlier about some of the guys who sort of move off to the margins. And a book that I originally wrote a book called Angry White Men in 2013. And that book did not even mention the name Trump in 2013. So we, of course, rewrote it after the election. And the thing about that I found among a lot of these guys was that they do see gender equality as a zero-sum game, as a win-lose. My first encounter with angry white men was on a TV talk show in which four white men said that they felt that they were the victims of reverse discrimination in the workplace, that white men are the new victims now. And the title of the show is a quote from one of these guys. This is my first intimation of what I came to call angry white men. And he said, "A black woman stole my job." And I thought to myself, well, that's interesting. Let me ask you one question about it. Actually, I have a question about one word in that sentence. I want to ask you about the word "my." Where did you get the idea it was your job? Why isn't it a black woman got the job or a job? Because without confronting men's sense of entitlement, we won't understand why so many men resist gender equality. We grew up thinking this is a level playing field. So, any policy that tilts it even a little bit, we think, oh my God, water's rushing uphill. It's reverse discrimination against us. So this was the key insight that I had, was that this sense of entitlement is a way that men, resist supporting gender equality. Why? Because we think it's a zero-sum game. If women win, men lose. The truth is, when women win, so do men. The pie gets bigger, right? You can make this case in businesses, for example. The more gender equal the business, the more profitable, higher rate of return, lower rates of absenteeism, higher rates of job satisfaction, higher rates of productivity. It's a win-win, right? You can also make that case in our personal lives. The more gender equal our relationships, the happier our kids are, the better they do in school, the happier women are, and the happier and healthier men are. So the evidence is all that it's not a zero-sum game at all.
So in that context, I'm really interested in your research of young men who seem to head in directions in support of what I think could be described as radical movements that really have no future. That if they were to look out 20 years or 30 years, which they obviously are not doing,
Right, of course.
they would realize, holy cow, what have I done for the last decade, or how have I spent my life? So what's the attraction to this very small percentage of young men who've had, and I'll concede, all kinds of different challenges, that,
Right.
and maybe not all the benefits that others in society have had. But some of them, by the way, some of them have had those benefits,
Yeah.
and have lived in affluent situations. What veers them off a path of what I would call rationality? And maybe that's not fair, but tell me.
Well,
what you
so here's what we're talking about. So let's start with the fact that, as you say, there starts out with this large population, and then it goes to a very, very small number of extremely angry young white men who believe that they have been dispossessed, that they have lost their sense of entitlement, that they experience what I call aggrieved entitlement. We were supposed to have those jobs. So you have to ask, like, why are they so angry? And why did they take this path? Now, typically what we might, the typical answers are, global restructuring, that these guys are downwardly mobile, they're lower middle class, their fathers owned small shops, mom and pop stores, but then Walmart moved in, or they had, union protected jobs in heavy industry like auto and steel, but those jobs have declined, et cetera. So they've lost what their grandfathers, their fathers, their great-grandfathers even in some cases had. They feel like it's not available to them, and they're angry about that. So we have a kind of structural, economic, political kind of sense. And I think that that's partly what the current administration has tapped into, is that sense of once it was better than now. Make America great again. We have to go backward into the future. So that, I think, is part of that sense. Now,
So is Make America Great Again really make white male
make America
America
white again? But more than that, I think it's, when people are asked, when was America great, that we need to, what's the again part? It's the 1950s, before women started going off to work, especially white women started going off to work so much, before feminism, before, the civil rights movement. That's when America was great. I beg to differ. So here's what, but let me say, that's how we typically understand this. My job in interviewing, I interviewed probably close to 100 young men who had been in white supremacist, neo-Nazi skinhead groups in Sweden, Germany, and the United States, and then also ex-jihadists in Britain. And I asked that, so I was interested in how they got into the movement and, of course, how they got out. How they got in had very little to do with all of this economic restructuring and globalization. It had a lot to do with masculinity. Imagine, Aaron, a guy, a 15, 16-year-old boy, at a skateboard park. It's 7 or 8 o'clock at night. There's nobody else around. He's kind of lost. School's not working out for him. He's not happy. He can't go home because he hates his family. They hate him. And he's kind of like alone. And suddenly these guys show up, and they say, "Hey, hang out with us. You look pretty cool. Come hang with us." And so he goes, and they start to tell him, "Oh, we have awesome parties. Everybody gets drunk, and it's really fun. And there's girls." And he starts hanging out with them. And then they say, "You are our brother." So what he's experiencing is comradeship, community, validation of his masculinity. You are one of us. You are our brother. And then, and only then, do they start saying, "And you have a sacred mission to preserve the white race." So the racism part, the white supremacy, is not the initial reason he gets in. He gets in because of the experience of feeling connected, like he has a family for once. One of the guys I interviewed said to me, he had been beaten up by his father routinely, and his stepfather. He was cast out, battered, bruised, and beaten up by his stepfather, thrown out into the street at age 12, left school, had to fend for himself, became a neo-Nazi skinhead. When he was a member, he had a big swastika tattooed on his neck at the time. And he said, but he then met a whole bunch of other guys from the middle of Pennsylvania. He was living in Philly, and they said, "You live in Philadelphia and you fight with all these immigrants and everything. You are like so awesome." And he said, you know what he said to me? He said, "That was like a dad or a mom saying, 'How was your day, son? How you doing?'" Because no one had ever said that to him. No one had ever validated him as a person. So he felt like this was the first time he really felt validated. So my feeling about this is these guys get in because they feel like they need a place to land, where they can be validated, where they can have brothers, family for the first time that won't beat them up. Now, if you want to tell me, all right, so Michael, how do we get these guys out? I will say to you, and I will say to law enforcement, I will say to policymakers, you don't go into and talk to these guys and say, your interpretation of page 173 of Mein Kampf is wrong. Because they haven't read it, and B, they don't know what you're talking about. But if you tell them you can have a sense of yourself as a man outside the movement, and that's how they get out. They get out by having a place to land.
All right, I want to talk more about how they get out and also what we can do to keep them from getting in the first place.
Sure.
So we'll be right back with Michael in just a moment.
For information on how to help promote civil and mutually respectful discourse and support expansion of the distribution of our programs, please email info@harbertv.com.
I'm Aaron Harber, host of The Aaron Harber Show. You can follow the show on Twitter for instant notification of new episodes, live event invitations, outtakes, and behind-the-scene photos. And tweet us your topic and guest suggestions today.
Join me and watch The Aaron Harber Show.
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 I'm Reverend Jesse Jackson. Watch The Aaron Harber Show and Keep Hope Alive.
I'm Aaron Harber, host of The Aaron Harber Show. I very much would like to hear from you about the program, so please send me an email with your thoughts. You can suggest what topics I should cover, what guests I should invite to be on the show, or even what specific questions you would like me to ask. This is your program, so send your suggestions to aaron@harbertv.com. I promise to personally read every one, so email me today. And most of all, thanks for watching.
The Aaron Harber Show may be viewed 24/7 at no charge from any location in the world at harbertv.com.
Welcome back to the show. This is part 2 of our special 2-part series with Michael Kimmel. So I posed 2 questions to you. One was, how do you extract? How do you create you talked about a landing into a tribe, as it were. How do you create an exit strategy, number one? And then later I'd like to talk a little, not that we have a lot of time, but what can we do so that we're able to maybe identify some of these boys before that happens? And obviously in the family situation you described, going to the family isn't necessarily going to be the answer. So let's talk about exit strategies.
Well, okay, so here's the story that virtually every single guy told me.
And these are guys who have exited.
Right, these are guys who were neo-Nazi, white supremacists, skinheads, and in Sweden, Germany, and the U.S. And I worked with 3 organizations, one called Exit in Sweden, which is the first one, very well funded by the government. And what they provide is group therapy. They provide job training, job placement services, safe houses if you need it. In other words, they really put a lot of resources in this. In Germany and the United States, there's networks of people who have gotten out. And what every single guy told me was they got out through their relationships. They got out because, one guy told me, the very first time I held my daughter and my baby daughter in my arms, I thought, like, what am I doing? What kind of future am I leaving for her? Another guy said, he was sitting there watching TV with his 4-year-old, and and there was an African American character in the children's show, and the kid started screaming racial epithets. And he heard it for the first time slightly differently. Others talked about the fact that when they were in prison, they met like African Americans, or one guy told me this Jewish guy hired him, even knowing he was a neo-Nazi, because he said, I trust you're honest, and he said, so it was that contact. This is axiomatic in social psychology, that if you want to break down these kinds of stereotypes, put people together and give them a task to do together. So they got out through the relationships with their children, with their partners or wives. Sometimes it was their parent, a mom who said, sometimes it was a partner who said, listen, I am not okay with this anymore. Either, it's me or the movement. And other times, one of the things I found with some of the Swedish guys is they grew out of it. What's really fun, partying and going out fighting and stuff like that at 16 is not so awesome when you're 36. You sort of grow out of it.
You decide you really don't want to take the chance of losing an eye.
Right. I mean, and so it's just not as much fun anymore. There's a kind of life cycle to it. So a lot of these guys aged out because they got a relationship. They got a job. So my conclusion is, if you want to help guys get out, you have to give them a place to land, a place outside the movement where they can take a stand as a man, where they can have their masculinity validated as a father, as a partner, as a worker. In some way, make them stakeholders in the system, rather than keep them marginal from it. Right? Keep them in opposition to it.
So what percentage, though? I assume it's still a low percentage of men who exit. Or is that not true? Or do most men exit?
So on the extreme right, we're really talking about perhaps 500,000 total in the United States who are involved in any ways in these movements, and then maybe 5 times that many on the internet, followers in chat rooms, et cetera, but not really in the movement itself. So we're not talking about an enormous number of people, but we are talking about a significant number, and obviously much more visible now than they were a few years ago. So part of, I think, the question is to give them a sense that they can find the things they found in the movement out of it. And so it is true that not that many exit the movement, but more than you'd think, partly because in Sweden, for example, a lot of these guys get into the movement at age 13, 14. By age 17 or 18, they're like out of high school. They're like, okay, I'm going to get a job and have a life. So you'd be surprised how many are exiting, and mostly, I think, how much knowing that there are people who are trying to get out or who could help them get out is a comfort to those guys who are in and see no way out. Like once, there is a way that you sort of enter this movement and it takes over your life. And then you feel like, oh my God, what have I done? There's no way out for me. What can I get out of this? It is enormously valuable to know that there is this group of people who were in exactly the space you are in right now, who were there, who, the idea is only a former can help a guy become a former.
So what percentage, though, do you think of that 500,000 or the 2.5 million are aware that there are viable exit options? And how do how do we make them more aware?
This is a really good question, and this is now, unfortunately, a political question. So how they become aware, of course, is through the networks. There's a closed Facebook group. There's a group in the United States called Life After Hate. That really is trying to help develop a network so that they can actually do outreach and reach these guys who are questioning, guys who are sort of thinking, is there a way for me to get out? Hear about Life After Hate through these guys, go, oh, those guys are, they're off the charts. Oh, really? How do I get in touch with them? But here's what's interesting. In the last months of the Obama administration, there were new grants for groups to combat violent extremism in the United States.
And I know there were.
There was a $400,000 grant given to Life After Hate to develop an exit model here in the U.S. that would enable guys to get out of the movement in that same way. Therapy, job training, job placement. When the Trump administration came into office, they canceled any grant that wasn't specifically targeting Muslim extremism. Now, as you know, Aaron, over 75% of all violence committed by violent extremists in the United States are committed by white nationalists, not by Muslims. But the only funding we have, that $400,000 was withdrawn from this group.
That's what I said were.
Yeah. I think we now we need more political will. Knowing what we know about how to help guys get out, we now need to put the resources of our government behind efforts that will help support them.
All right. Well, and of course, it really raises the question of why any administration would defund that effort.
Of course.
So
you should want it.
Exactly. So we're going to take our last break. We'll be back to wrap up with Michael in just a moment.
For information on how to help promote civil and mutually respectful discourse and support expansion of the distribution of our programs, please email info@harbertv.com.
The Rex Howell Broadcaster of the Year Award recognizes an individual who, through leadership, skill, and dedication, is advancing the broadcast industry in our state and our nation. Tonight, we honor Aaron Harber. Aaron has worked extensively in the media as a host, producer, political and economic commentator, and columnist. Today, the Aaron Harber Show is the focus of his media involvement. Aaron, it is a privilege to present you with the Rex Howell Broadcaster of the Year Award. Congratulations.
Just make journalism great again. I'm Aaron Harber, host of The Aaron Harber Show. Find us on Facebook to get all the latest updates, see behind-the-scene photos, and make comments and ask me questions. You can see episodes before their TV broadcast, so like the show today.
Join me and watch the Aaron Harber Show.
Watch the Aaron Harber Show.
Watch the Aaron Harber Show.
Watch the Aaron Harper Show.
Watch the Aaron Harber Show.
I'm Reverend Jesse Jackson. Watch the Aaron Harber Show and keep hope alive.
The Aaron Harber Show may be viewed 24/7 at no charge from any location in the world at harbertv.com.
Welcome back to the show. This is our final segment in our two-part series with Michael Kimmel. So we've talked about the exit strategies potentially. What about, are there any approaches, any prophylactic measures we can take, any programs that need to be developed so that we can do a better job of identifying kids who are likely to really veer off the path and help them in kind of an early stage intervention so they don't as easily go down that route?
Well, I think there are several different answers to this question, and I'll give you a couple. One is a sort of school-based idea. One is a sort of post-secondary school idea. When he first came into office in 2009, one of the first things that Barack Obama wanted to do, you may remember, was to make community college free. And the reason that he wanted to do that is because he recognized that there were so many working class guys who were being, outsourced and downsized and losing jobs in the heavy manufacturing and heavy industry, and they needed an on-ramp onto the information superhighway. They needed a way to retool so that they wouldn't be waiting for the jobs that their grandfathers and fathers might have had that weren't coming. And of course, that immediately got shut down. That never went anywhere. But it strikes me that that's the kind of ambitious, visionary idea that we need to say, because right now these guys are not only on the service road to the information, they're in a drainage ditch. They cannot figure out how to get onto the service road to get onto the highway. And so, of course, they are furious about that, as anybody would be. So that's one thing. I think it's also important in schools. One of the things that's really interesting is the way that we talk, for example, about school-based violence, these rampage school shootings, which every other country, they have one every 20 years,
decade or whatever.
And we have one every 20 days. Right? And you say, why is this happening? And I know we get into these very facile conversations about guns or not guns. Of course, guns have to be part of the conversation, but they're not the whole thing. What I think is interesting is when these happen, you will notice, Aaron, that virtually 100% of these random school shootings, these rampage school shootings, are done by middle-class white boys. right? So, of course, what do we talk about? We talk about mental illness. We talk about psychopathology, because when it's white people who do things, we talk about individuals, because racism keeps us disaggregating white people. Now imagine what would happen if any one of these cases was a black boy or a Muslim boy. Then we'd be talking about them. Their religion makes them do this, their community, their culture, whatever it is. So racism disaggregates white people and aggregates people of color, right? That's how it works. So my feeling is, if that were true, that this was a mental illness problem, then you would expect, I know of very few studies that suggest that there are dramatic gender differences. So why aren't girls doing this, right? That's another question you'd want to ask. But even more than that, what does that tell you? If there are so many boys who are having such mental problems that they're picking up assault weapons and walking into their schools and opening fire, what does that tell you? We need a lot more mental health services in our schools, don't we? Now, under No Child Left Behind, we ended up eviscerating all of the non-curricular programs, all of the counselors. A lot of places have canceled school bands and orchestras because it's too expensive. You have to focus on the standardized test. So in some ways, we've created the conditions in which all these boys who are so mentally ill that they open fire, they're flying just under the radar and nobody notices. Somebody's got to pay attention. We've got to, again, put the resources there so that people can notice, wow, I think this kid is in trouble. I think we need to sort of figure out a way to reach them before they reach for a gun.
Does it also make, or does it make any sense to inform young people at early ages about the temptations that may occur, or are the percentages and the number of kids who really veer off that path so severely so limited that would not be a good investment?
The numbers are low, but I think we can do a lot more to foster resilience in all of our children. We know that there's tons of bullying going on. We know that there's cyberbullying. We know that this is happening. Just the other day, I was reading in the paper about a couple whose 10-year-old daughter had been so severely cyberbullied. Her school didn't do enough, didn't do very much anything. It is not the right solution to a child being bullied to isolate the victim of the bullying, right? So now they're suing their school district, and rightly so, because the schools failed them. So it seems to me that this is a place where we need a lot more attention and a lot more resources, because we can foster resilience. We can foster those kinds of relationships. We can encourage the kids who are targeted to find alternative poles around which they can build a community.
All right, I know we've got like 30 seconds left, but in regard to bullying, given how much this has been studied, how many programs there are to stop it, how many schools, in fact, every school at every level knows that this is an issue that they have to address, that they have responsibility for.
Right.
Yet it still seems rampant. Where's the disconnect?
I think we talk a good game on bullying, but I actually think that we don't have the will among school administrators to fully address it. Partly because many of the administrators identify with the bullies, because the bullies are often, bullying is most severe in what we call jockocracies, those schools that are run by the sports teams that are often very successful. And the administrators revel in it because the parents love it, the community loves it. And as long as that's the case, as long as the community rallies around the bullies, and you see this in so many cases, as long as the community rallies around the bullies, we won't have the political will to stop it.
All right, well, hopefully we'll change that. Michael, thank you so much.
Great to meet you.
All right, that was Michael Kimmel. This is the end of part 2. Make sure you watch part 1 of our 2-part series with Michael. I'm Aaron Harber. Thanks for watching.
Please contact us. We want to hear from you. And thanks for watching.